Hello, we're setting up Facebook Live. Good evening to everyone on Zoom and Facebook Live. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to this Mindful Money online seminar. I'm Barry Coates. I'm the founder and CEO of Mindful Money. I'll tell you a bit about Mindful Money during the seminar, but basically we're a charity that enables the public to use their investment money as a force for good. We've been doing these online seminars for a while. This is our 13th seminar. And we've been really enjoying it, so we're keeping on doing them for forever, it seems. So we've just committed to doing the next 3 months. So welcome all. If you've got time on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m, then you're very welcome to join us here. We're covering different issues. So tonight we're covering what we call the roadmap to sustainable finance. You can see all of the other seminars, so the other 12 seminars, on our website, www.mindfulmoney.nz. And if you follow the links through to get involved and online seminars, they're there. They're both full YouTube recorded version and a written summary for those who prefer that. So on to tonight, we're going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes as a discussion, and then we're going to open it up for questions and comments, whatever you want to add. And if you can put those into chat if you're on Zoom, and into comments if you're on Facebook. So that would be great. We'll make sure that we deal with those questions and you can enter them at any time. Sorry to mute you for those on Zoom. Not intending to be authoritarian, it's just a lot easier this way. So a really warm welcome to our guest tonight. We have Pip Best, and Pip and Erica are both very modest. I asked them for what they want to say about themselves, and they have kept it really short. So Pip's at EY, used to be known as Ernst & Young for some of you oldies. And she's leading their climate change and sustainability team. She's also the point person for the Sustainable Finance Secretariat, Sustainable Finance Forum Secretariat. We'll come on to that, along with our other guest, who is Erica Miles. Erica's also kind of key member of the Secretariat. She's director at West 9 Consulting, and she specializes in responsible investment, corporate sustainability, and EHS risk management. So welcome to you both. Fantastic to have you along. Thank you for joining us. We're largely talking about the Sustainable Finance Forum, and just as a preface, I think this is a hugely important process that addresses one of the key issues that we need to make progress on if we're ever going to reduce our emissions and improve our sustainability record. So let's dive straight into the discussion. So I guess the first question is, so in a nutshell, or maybe not a nutshell, maybe a bit longer than that, what's the Sustainable Finance Forum? I guess, Pip, you're going to lead on that?
I can do that one, Barry.
Oh, sorry, Erica, yeah.
That's okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. I have to say, Matt Winneray always says I'm far too modest, but I think it's a collective effort from a lot of people, this forum. So Where did it come from? It's the first initiative of the Aotearoa Circle, which is, as you would have heard from the session from Jonathan Porritt last week, is an initiative, private and public sector, that is tasked with trying to reverse the decline of New Zealand's natural resources. And they worked out that to do that, the economy would have to play its part, because it's the engine room of the environmental system that we need. So that was the first work stream from the Aotearoa Circle to kick off. And we started the process, I think, January of last year, or even probably the year before that. And we went through a process of finding out what could be done to help the financial system deliver on sustainability goals. So the interim report was released in October of last year, and this report had potential pathways in it. They weren't recommendations, they were suggestions on things that could be done, levers that could be pulled. Then the report went into consultation phase, and now we are entering into the exciting bit, which is the roadmap, which is the tangible recommendations and actions that could be taken. In terms of the roadmap itself, we broke it down into 3 sections. The first one is changing mindsets, and that looks at issues like leadership, and how do you change the cultural aspects so that businesses, banks, insurance sector will embrace sustainability. We looked at financing green. So how can you direct capital to address issues that are affecting the planet and also society? The most prominent one of that is climate change. And the other one is greening finance. So how do you put in place mechanisms that will help integrate environmental and social considerations into the day-to-day BAU of a corporate or of a bank or of a insurance company or indeed of a consumer trying to buy financial advice. So those were the 3 sections of what we broke it down to. So now comes the exciting bit of the roadmap.
So let's just pause there, because I recognise some people on the call who have been huge contributors to this process. So thanks to them, and we look forward to your comments in the chat. But for those who haven't been so involved, let's just sort of pause for a second. So you said financing green and greening finance, and I think it's kind of an elegant way of putting it. You know, it should be financing sustainability and sustainabilitizing finance, but the essence is that it is both about generating more resources plus also integrating sustainability into the finance system. And I think it's worthwhile people understanding those as being the 2 major kind of directions. Is that correct? And
Yeah.
You know, maybe you can talk about sort of the boundaries of sustainability is also sort of not just green stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Barry, because a lot of the international roadmaps do focus purely on financing green, focusing, and then they get even more narrow in terms of focusing on the climate change aspect of green, whereas this is green is used because it's easier to, as you said, easier than saying sustainability, because even then people don't necessarily know the full extent of what sustainability is. So when we say financing green, we're talking about mechanisms that can be used to drive capital towards social good and environmental good. So that's what we define as sustainability. So it does definitely include that social element. So for New Zealand, it could be things like how do you direct capital to reducing inequality, or how do you direct capital to improve social housing. Those types of issues is coming in under financing green.
I think that's good, because it sort of helps orient people. And I think the sort of catchphrase is, how can a finance system be sustainable if it's not inclusive, if it doesn't include all people? So
Correct.
It's great that that's really strongly a part of the system.
Correct.
Let's move on. Pip, can you just give us a snapshot of what are the key issues that we're trying to solve? What's the problem here? Why have this thing, and what are we trying to what barriers are we trying to address?
I guess at a basic level, the problem is that money is flowing into the wrong places for a sustainable economy. And so when we say that, I'll pull up a couple of examples, but we have also released an interim report that went out last November. And if you just Google the Sustainable Finance Forum, you'll find it pretty easily online. And it does set out, I guess, the problem. I guess I'm quite biased, but it sets out, I guess, our problem statement quite well and in quite a bit of detail. But I guess some of the key elements that we found, and we did do a lot of stakeholder engagement to try and really make sure that we had identified these problems correctly. But the first part is, I guess, our current economic system relies on environmental and social inputs and doesn't necessarily provide those same inputs back out. So we're basically consuming our natural and social capital to produce financial capital. And so that is potentially sustainable in a very short-term environment, but over the longer term, we will run out of environmental and social capital to then convert to financial capital. So that's one space that, one of the issues. A couple of other issues that I guess come up very prominently is the way the current financial system is set up to basically, it drives short-term decision making or short-termism, and that is through basically people being rewarded based off mainly financial results, and so then the focus is completely on that short-term financial outcome rather than long-term value or sustainable outcomes.
Which is a problem right through the system, isn't it? So if somebody who's kind of doing investment management has got incentives for short-term performance of a fund, then that gets then fed back through to pressure the companies.
Yeah, and that some people are incentivized, I guess, to provide high dividends to shareholders, even though it may not be in the longer term interest of the organization. So I guess in several different ways that can be a concern. And I guess I'm framing this in lots of different ways, but it is a similar issue. The last thing that I guess is very prominent is just around the fact we don't price externalities. And so when we say externalities, we basically mean we don't put a price on these environmental and social inputs that we consume, or the kind of bad outputs that they produce. So obviously greenhouse gas emissions is one that we now have, the emissions trading scheme that covers some of those, but it doesn't, I guess, cover all of them. But then there's a full range of other environmental and social outcomes that are just what are termed externalities. So they have no cost to the person that produces it, but it does have a cost to society that either a government wears or we all wear in the longer term.
And I think a lot of people will recognize those problems. I mean, that last one is really resonant, because you can very easily have a conversation with somebody about finance and talk to them for half an hour about finance, about volatility, about returns, about risk and everything else. And then you say, well, where's the money going? What are you investing in? And that becomes virtually irrelevant, let alone the impact of what that money is actually being invested to do. And I think it's a problem for right through the system. It's certainly one of the reasons that Mindful Money was established, because so little of finance and investment is intentionally supporting sustainability. And I think that's a really important element. And maybe maybe those who want to comment and chat can add their own perspectives of what they see the problems are, and if those three issues kind of resonate. So I guess back to you, Erica. Can you talk about the key issues that were identified in the interim report, and maybe about the kind of changes that could be put in place as a way to address those?
Yeah, sure. So the interim report just identified potential pathways, and one of the critical elements in the in shifting the the financial system is leadership. So what we're currently grappling with is how much do you need to balance the responsibility of individual corporates or banks or insurers versus how much do you put the regulation over the top of it. So how do you encourage the corporate sector to take initiatives to embrace sustainability and sustainable finance or concepts in terms of the externalities, and can you do that without a regulation, or do you need the regulation behind it? And a good example of that is around the fiduciary duties for directors and trustees. So most of the roadmaps overseas have explicit fiduciary duties that include environmental and social factors, but in New Zealand we don't have that. So
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? So let's just kind of slightly unpack fiduciary duty for those who may not be so familiar. So why don't you give us the kind of layman's version of fiduciary duty and why it might be a problem?
Yeah, so the current fiduciary duties require directors or trustees basically to account for financial risks within and be responsible people basically for financial outcomes. But it doesn't currently include environmental or social considerations within those duties. So if you're a board director, you need to be financially responsible or prudent, but you don't necessarily need to be environmentally or socially responsible. So it's do we need to make that explicit through regulation, for example, or can we rely on the corporate sector and the financial banks and insurers to do that by themselves? So those are the types of issues we're trying to weigh up.
I guess that's a really important one, because if directors are saying my responsibility to the company are primarily to make sure that it makes lots of money for its shareholders, then they're able to dismiss issues like climate change. But I guess the change that's coming, and maybe you just want to briefly refer to the legal opinion, is to say that actually social and environmental issues and climate change are also financially important, and they have to be taken into account. Right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so there was a legal opinion that also came out the same time as the interim report, and that was confirmed that directors had a responsibility to look at financial risks as part of their duties, and it concluded that climate change was a financial risk and therefore they needed to look at it. So that was the gist of that opinion, which again, as Pip says, if you look at the Aotearoa Circle, Google Sustainable Finance Forum, you'll find the legal opinion on the same page. So that's one thing we're looking at. Another thing we're looking at is how do you put the infrastructure in place to enable the externalities to be included within the cost of within the financial accounts of a business. So so what do we need to put in place to enable that to happen? So we're looking at the availability of data. We're looking at whether companies should be disclosing more of their performance and not just the impact of the operation on all the good bits that a lot of corporate sustainability reports seem to put themselves in glowing light, but some of the more negative impacts that some of their business practices might have. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at how you can direct capital to the positive impacts, as we were just talking about, Barry. You know, how do we address capital so that we can address the inequality, or we can improve access to housing, or we can get a smooth transition to a low carbon economy. So those are the types of issues that we are debating at the moment.
Cool. And I guess there's a big long laundry list, so maybe some of the issues will come up in chat, because we could probably spend an hour talking about the different issues that might be in the roadmap.
Yeah, you could probably talk for more than an hour. I think you could probably talk for an hour on fiduciary duties, but I don't think it would be that interesting to a lot of people. But yeah, I think one of the key things that we have to consider here is that we are looking at all the levers that could be pulled. But a lot of the international research is telling us that you can't just do one of these things. You need to have all the actors need to be involved. So you need to have governments involved, you need to have corporates involved, you need to have fund managers, asset owners involved, you have to have insurers involved. You can't just have, it's not just one person's remit, when you can't just say, oh, we've put in TCFD reporting, or we've put in ESG in the fiduciary duty, so we're okay now, we've got a sustainable financial system. You need to play with all the tools in the sandpit to make this system work. Cool.
Hey, this would be a great time for anyone to put some stuff in chat. So we've got some Q&A to do. I'll just ask Pip one last question to kind of lead into the chat. So Pip, tell us what's kind of next and the roadmap to the roadmap.
So we've probably been working on this for about 18 months now, and we are looking to try and issue this final roadmap in November. So for us now, it's about building momentum. So, you know, this is really, I guess, a call to arms. As Erica said, there will be recommendations that have a role for everyone. So corporates to banks to governments to civil society. I mean, there really is so much to be done, and we are going to be doing, obviously, that, you know, this is the rest of our work is going to happen over an election as well. So you know, there's lots of things, lots of ways to, I guess, to influence and get this on people's radars, and hopefully create the biggest impact we can, and get swift action to really take up some of these recommendations. So I guess this is a bit of a call to arms in a way, and we are trying to build momentum. So we do have an email address that we are welcome for anyone to get in contact with us, and you can either contact Mindful Money, who can provide you with our email address, or it's sff.secretariat@nz.ey.com. We will be coming out and doing some workshops, basically to consult and communicate the work we've done to date, and also really to try and get commitments for people to take up these actions. So that's really what's on our radar. A lot of consultation in the lead up to hopefully issuing the final roadmap in November.
Cool. So we'll also have future sessions on this later on this Mindful Money seminar series. So keep a lookout for those. Hey, I'm going to start off with Sean. Thanks for the question, Sean. And Sean says, what are the questions that asset managers need to ask corporates to get them collecting the right data and then including the right information?
That's a great question. Sorry. Yeah. So, you know, we are covering, I guess, in quite a bit of detail what kind of data and what kind of reporting we expect. I guess something that we note is that financial institutions are very good at reporting what they do in their sustainability reports, but not necessarily what their investments do. And so, you know, that is a bit of a missing piece around the impact of their investments. And Barry, this really comes back to your point around, you know, we don't really talk about the actual, besides the financial return we get from our investments, we don't really talk about what actual benefit they're providing us as a society or our environment. And so that's the type of information or the big gap that we are focusing on. So it's kind of moving towards this impact reporting, and then how do you get the data and the information to be able to do that. And probably, Erica, that TCFD, and again, I don't want to, so specifically climate change information due to the kind of financial risk that is posing to the economy.
Yeah,
I think
that's it's a good question, Sean, because a lot of the asset managers and indeed the asset owners that I speak with, one of their biggest bugbears is that corporate disclosures don't allow for comparability. The corporate disclosures don't really tell them the honest truth of what they need to do and what their strategy is going forward. And so we are putting some recommendations in there about getting a baseline standard metrics that are should be required from corporates. There's some work going on again overseas that has a standard set of metrics, but we need to make sure that they're appropriate for New Zealand context, and then making sure that also there's an education piece, and asset managers and asset owners also need to know what to do with that data once they've got it, so they can pick out the areas where they need to engage with those corporates.
It's also, what we find on particularly on asset managers or fund managers like KiwiSaver providers, they're asked to prepare very detailed comparable information on fees and returns and so on. But when it comes to sustainability, they are required, they're not required to produce anything, let alone anything that can be comparable. And so we get a lot of claims from fund managers about how green or ethical they are, but without the substantiation and without the basis for comparison. The FMA has launched an inquiry on exactly this because they're worried about that greenwashing. So certainly, you know, be great to see those kind of issues addressed in the roadmap. I'm going to move on to Julia has asked from Facebook. Thanks, Julia. What's the biggest barrier you're finding for corporates? And in terms of taking this step from current corporate ESG reporting to actually meet the higher standards of TCFD or beyond. So why don't you quickly unpack TCFD and then talk about the sort of where reporting is going to, integrated reporting, etc.
Yeah, I think TCFD is merely a policy instrument that could be used to jog people's action around climate change. And I think it's important that people realise that implementing reporting against TCFD, or indeed it's a framework. It's not a standard. So how you apply it and the benefit you gain as a corporate from applying TCFD is a function of how well you integrate it into your business. So I would suggest that to be a success, the climate change should be integrated into the overall corporate strategy and then disclosed accordingly. It shouldn't be, TCFD disclosure should not be separate from any other sort of financial disclosures or any sustainability disclosures. So that's my thoughts on TCFD.
So just for people who may not know, TCFD, Task Force for climate-related financial
disclosures.
disclosures,
Yep.
TCFD, and it is an international initiative. The government's been consulting on it. And a question from Bridget, who is kind of, I know, very, very deeply involved in some of the stuff. Would we support TCFD being mandated for New Zealand corporates and perhaps by extension also to private companies and maybe to investment funds? Any comments on that?
Well, I mean, we do have the government consultation on that, and that is something that we would be supportive of. And this is probably more of a view from a particular member, might be myself, of the Sustainable Finance Forum. But I think we definitely would see that the risk goes beyond just listed companies. And so why would you limit the reporting to that part of the economy? Rather than making it broader. So I guess the rationale for just kind of keeping it around large listed companies seems quite narrow. And should it cross financial institutions? Yes, most definitely. And I think that's again highlights the importance of the finance sector in really kind of keeping a healthy economy and avoiding systemic risks like climate change.
Yeah, and there's also been calls for TCFD to apply to, for example, government departments, as Louise has just commented in the chat, that SOEs, government departments, etc., could also be bound. So maybe it's more of a question of size of entity rather than its kind of legal status or public or private ownership.
Well, that comes down, how wide do you go? That comes down to the leadership question, though, Barry. If climate change is a financial risk, there's no question about that. And whether a company needs a piece of regulation to help it reinforce that message, or whether it has enough of its own leadership to address climate change. It might not necessarily disclose using TCFD framework, but it should still be putting climate risk. And indeed, there are other environmental and social risks that also deserve attention as well. Like we've got biodiversity, for example, we've got inequality, we've got modern slavery. Those things exist in New Zealand. So we should be including those within corporate strategies, those types of issues as well.
I've got another one from Louise, which is kind of sneak preview on what your favorite roadmap actions are. So if you're asked for your top couple of roadmap actions, what would they be? Pip, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, and I think maybe if I just roll it into, I think I saw a question from Wendy there as well around what keeps you up at night.
It's going to be my next one.
Oh, sorry, Bear. And I don't know. I mean, there's two things I just don't think we fully, day to day, fully appreciate the impacts that climate change is going to cause to our world. And so in terms of urgency, climate-related recommendations, I guess I feel what I think can hopefully not save us, but hopefully help us avoid something that I don't think anyone is prepared for. The other thing then is just remuneration, I guess, or how we kind of reward people. What else keeps me up at night is seeing things like the volume of share buybacks going on at the moment. To basically, one of the outcomes of that is increasing the stock price and the way that people might then be rewarded for those types of actions. I find really concerning for the long-term stability of a financial sector as well. And so things that then could hopefully change that type of behaviour are very, I guess, close to my heart.
Cool. Erica?
My favourite thing, which I'm not sure we'll get across the line, but is if people had to pay the true price of the product. So that would ultimately stop mass consumerism of products. So, for example, disposable fashion drives me insane. So if people actually paid the true cost of the environmental and the social impact of buying t-shirts once a week, for example, and actually paid for it financially and they'd value their t-shirt differently, and they wouldn't waste it. So we've got to change the capitalist model, which is basically sell lots and lots of t-shirts, because that's what measures success. But actually, if you measure success and actually we've managed to restore this amount of environmental damage that we've done, we've managed to employ this many people, we've managed to contribute to this community, as well as the financial value, that would make me happy.
Yeah, I think I've got another couple. One is, we've talked about creating an institutional structure to carry this work on past this initial phase of preparing a roadmap. And I think that we've seen so many good initiatives in New Zealand that kind of get to a certain point and everyone says, gee, what a good idea. We ought to get around to doing that one day. So I think the institutional structure and a push to make this live after the roadmap is going to be really important. And the other thing is, alongside your kind of, I guess your solution on pricing, Erica, is the whole thing about regulatory backstops. I think we need a base of regulation in order to lift the level on these things and make sure that there is proper reporting and information. And the thing that keeps me awake at night is the fact that we'll do all of this and we won't see the world change at all, because we're severely running out of time.
Well, you're gonna have no choice soon, Barry, because we already are massively exposed to the damage of climate change on our economy as well. We have no choice. We have to do it. This is no longer a nice to have, or we can worry about it later. This is one opportunity, and you've been given it, and don't waste it and don't squander it.
Indeed, and Simon's asked a question. Maybe we'll have to make this the last question. But what he's saying, how much of this is made to government ministers, or are we still sort of polishing the product? So if maybe we could just conclude with a little bit about so where does this go in terms of political acceptability, in terms of making its way through into the government, into the larger corporates, the finance sector? How do you see the kind of theory of change going? How will this actually be taken ahead and adopted? Pip, you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, so we do have quite, I guess, a rigorous government engagement plan, both sides of the election. So it's very much, I guess, that theory of change, or how we see this coming to fruition, is building momentum, showing the importance of this within corporates, within society, and really getting it on the radar of government, and putting it up there in terms of importance. So that's I guess how we're working on it. And as Erica likes to say, so hopefully I don't steal your punchline here, Erica, it's not about one particular recommendation, it's about doing everything. And making sure that when the recommendations comes out, it's not like, oh, we've done 3 out of 11, or whatever it is. It's about actually this is what we need to be doing. And so reporting on progress and making sure that we're looking at all of implementing all the recommendations, I guess, is something as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. It should feel uncomfortable. If it feels comfortable and normal, then we're not being ambitious enough. We need to be changing fundamentally how we view capitalism, to no longer just looking at financial value. We need to look at environmental value and social value, and that's not easy. Most people have been obsessed with financial value.
And as Jonathan Porritt said on the seminar last week, we've got to do everything now.
Well, exactly. I completely agree with them.
And our excuses for saying, no, we'll just start off with one or two things and we'll do the rest later. We're running out of the later. So
there is no more later, yeah. And when you've got children, you kind of want them to be able to have grandchildren. So, there's a selfish element in there too.
Thank you both very much. That was great. A thanks also to some of our sort of co-workers on the technical working group and on the Sustainable Finance Forum leadership group. So I see Belinda and Wendy on the call. Thanks very much, guys, for all your inputs. And also maybe a shout out to Rob, the late Rob Fennick, who along with Jonathan was one of the inspirations behind the Sustainable Finance Forum, and it was great that there was the initial Fennick Forum held just over a week ago. So certainly his inspiration and example was so important to this initiative. So we're back next week, and next week we're slightly changing course. We're going to talk about mindful money, and we're going to particularly talk about investment processes. We're going to say, if it's important to you to do sustainable finance as opposed to us talking about it, then what do you do, and how do you know what's ethical, what's not ethical? How do you evaluate the different options? How do you change your KiwiSaver? How do you invest and manage funds that meet ethical standards? What should we be looking for, etc. So we're going to do some of that next week, and then after that, the following weeks, we're embarking on a new course of looking at more thematic issues. So we're going into climate change, environment, some of the social issues around issues like investing in alcohol and gambling, etc. And we're talking about ways to look at sustainability. So thanks again to you both. We'll have this up on our website on Mindful Money hopefully tomorrow as a YouTube, and we'll do a short summary of it as well. So check into Mindful Money, www.mindfulmoney.nz. Thanks to my co-conspirators Karen Swainson and October Conway, who have been busy behind the scenes, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure.
Thanks all.